Let's get going then. Thanks for being here, everyone. I am Community Development Committee Chair Robert Lilligren. It's Monday, April 19th. Before I call the meeting to order, I'd like to say a few things about how we'll conduct this meeting. I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is causing us to alter our usual procedures. As we know, Governor Walz has declared a peacetime emergency in response to COVID-19, and the Met Council has determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct in-person meetings for reasons as stated in the Governor's emergency executive order. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Community Development Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. This meeting will be conducted by WebEx and will be recorded. Members of the public will be able to monitor this meeting by going to the agenda online to view the live stream of the meeting. The video is embedded on the website. So if there are no questions, I'll call this meeting to order by taking attendance by roll call to ensure we have a quorum for this meeting. Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. We received advance notice that council members Atlas Ingebrigtsen and MUSA will not be participating today. I'll start with Councilmember Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Johnson. Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Bento.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a quorum. Thanks, Michelle. And moving, the next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda, and we can see the agenda posted online. If there are no objections or changes, then we can move on to our business. Any changes to the agenda? Any changes? Hearing none, the next item on our agenda is the minutes from the April 15th Community Development Committee meeting. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Excuse me, Chair Lilligren, just one correction. It was the April 5th meeting.
April 5th. What did I say? I apologize.
That's fine. No, I just made a little correction there. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Michelle. Thanks for the correction. So the next item on our minutes are the minutes from the April 5th meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
Wolf moves approval.
Second by Lee.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Council members. Any discussion, corrections? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the minutes.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson. Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Bento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted, and we'll move on to our business items. And the first item is business item 2021-68. It's the Battle Creek Regional Park Pig's Eye Lake Master Plan Amendment. And before Colin presents the staff report on this amendment, I'd like to note for the public that we have received several comments regarding this amendment from the public sent to staff, our public info email address, and to council members. And while this is not a public hearing, we have posted the comments that we have received as of noon today to our agenda and on our website. Any additional comments we receive will be included in our April 19th minutes for this meeting. So moving on to our agenda item, business item 2021-68, the Battle Creek Regional Park Pig's Eye Master Plan Amendment. It's a Ramsey County amendment, and Colin Kelly will present. Mr. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Council members, I am Colin Kelly, Planning Analyst, and I'm here to present the Battle Creek Regional Park Pig's Eye Lake Master Plan Amendment on behalf of Ramsey County. I should note that Mark McCabe and Scott County with Ramsey County Parks and Recreation And Nate Campbell and Aaron McFarland with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are joining us today and may respond to questions at the end of this presentation as appropriate. Next slide, please. The Pig's Eye unit of Battle Creek Regional Park is located near the center of the regional park system. The figure on the left is figure 1 in the staff report. The Pig's Eye unit is located in the southeast corner of Ramsey County and the city of St. Paul. The figures in the center and on the right are figures 2 and 3 in the staff report. The Pig's Eye unit consists of a 629-acre lake, a backwater of the Mississippi River, surrounded by 378 acres of land to the west and 125 acres of wetlands to the east and northwest of the lake, which is within the floodplain. The Pig's Eye unit is one of 4 units in Battle Creek Regional Park and one of 2 that are managed by Ramsey County. The Indian Mounds and Fish Hatchery units are managed by the city of St. Paul. I should note that this master plan amendment does not address park acquisition, boundary adjustments, recreational infrastructure, programming, or access to or within the Pig's Eye unit. The master plan amendment is intended to act as a separate natural resources guiding document. Next slide, please. In 2015, funding became available through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Continuing Authorities Program to develop a feasibility study for the implementation of islands within Pig's Eye Lake. The Corps, in collaboration with Ramsey County, initiated an agency-wide planning effort comprised of federal, state, and local agencies in compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, or MEPA. Extensive agency coordination efforts included the Corps, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Minnesota Department of Transportation, the Metropolitan Council, Ramsey, Washington Metro Watershed District, Ramsey County, and the city of St. Paul. Additionally, non-governmental organizations including the Friends of the Mississippi River, Friends of Pool 2, and the Friends of the Parks and Trails of St. Paul and Ramsey County were also included in the review and approval process of the feasibility study. In 2018, Ramsey County applied for grant dollars from the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council and was awarded funding to cover the local cost share. On February 21st, 2021, the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners unanimously adopted a resolution approving the Battle Creek Regional Park Pig's Eye Lake Master Plan Amendment and authorizing its submission to the Metropolitan Council. Next slide, please. Public engagement on the island building project and other efforts related to Battle Creek Regional Park and the Pig's Eye unit occurred over multiple years. Public engagement for the feasibility study was completed with 2 concurrent 30-day public review periods for both NEPA and MEPA processes to allow general feedback from the public. Public notices for this review were listed on the Minnesota Environmental Quality Board, or EQB, website, and were also shared via press releases in the local newspaper, Ramsey County website, and on Ramsey County social media outlets. Additional public engagement related to Battle Creek Regional Park and the Pig's Eye unit occurred during the development of Ramsey County's Park and Recreation System Plan in 2018 and the initiation of a planning process to update the overall Battle Creek Regional Park Master Plan in 2019. The System Plan community engagement process was conducted using 2 methods primarily, pop-up meetings and an online survey. Currently, there is a separate, larger master planning effort being conducted for the overall Battle Creek Regional Park. A robust public participation process for this effort was launched in the spring of 2019 and included several pop-up events, stakeholder discussions, community forums, a design workshop, and an online survey. Public engagement continued in 2020, predominantly using online or virtual approaches due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Public engagement for this Focus Master Plan Amendment was intended to reach a wide audience. As part of the planning process, Ramsey County held a 45-day public review period. Notification of the public review period occurred through multiple channels. Because in-person meetings were not an option at the time due to the COVID-19 pandemic, a virtual public meeting was hosted to allow for additional public comment. Future master planning for the Pig's Eye unit that relates to public safety or protection, or explores access or future recreational or infrastructure improvements will re-engage local residents and community members. There was mixed support from the public regarding the plan amendment, particularly related to the island building project. Some commenters stated that the existing pollution concerns should be addressed before other actions are taken, or that public participation opportunities during the development of the feasibility study were not well communicated. Other commenters referenced the opportunity to study different plant species in the context of a changing climate, or express support for the project. Next slide, please. As previously stated, the Focus Plan Amendment addresses natural resource improvements to the Pig's Eye unit and does not address park access or possible recreational improvements. The recommended plan for island building was developed to improve aquatic habitat, improve the quantity and quality of habitat for migratory bird species, and maintain or enhance the quantity of shoreline habitat. The design includes 6 islands. 3 of the islands would use a split design establishing sheltered areas in the center of the islands, creating nearly 18 acres of protected wetland habitat. A variety of fill material, including rock, sand, and topsoil, will be used for island construction. The rock will be sourced from a quarry. The sand and topsoil will consist primarily of material dredged from the southern portion of Pool 2 of the Mississippi River, above Lock and Dam No. 2 in Hastings. The Corps tested all dredged material for this project per Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, or MPCA, guidelines, and the material was approved per MPCA testing standards for placement in water for habitat creation. MPCA guidelines have been developed specifically to protect wildlife that use these habitats. According to the plan amendment, the Corps has been successful using dredge material on past island construction projects in the Mississippi River. The construction of the islands in Pig's Eye Lake is anticipated to be completed by the fall of 2024. Next slide, please. The natural resources within the Pig's Eye unit will be restored and managed according to the 2018 system plan. Restoration and maintenance of restored areas will be a priority throughout the Pig's Eye unit to carry out the mission of providing adequate sustainable habitats to support populations of native wildlife species. Ramsey County acknowledges the need to address public health protection for the Pig's Eye unit due to surrounding land uses, existing land conditions, and contamination. Additional planning and agency coordination will be required to develop a plan for long-term environmental cleanup for the Pig's Eye Lake area. It is anticipated that Ramsey County would take a lead role within the Pig's Eye unit for engaging a multi-agency planning study. From a public protection standpoint, next steps include securing funding for planning activities, initiation of an agency-wide planning team to determine project scope, objectives, coordination, stakeholders, agencies and public engagement, and a funding strategy, initiation of agency and public engagement process, the initiation of additional site assessments, development of an agency-wide monitoring and stewardship plan, and securing of additional funding for remediation. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Most of the Pig's Eye unit land cover consists of mixed woods to the west and wetlands to the east and northwest of the lake. The wooded peninsula consists of typical floodplain trees such as cottonwood, silver maple, green ash, willow, American elm, and some swamp white oak. However, several invasive tree species have also encroached into this area, including buckthorn and box elder. The wetlands within the park consist of native vegetation such as prairie cordgrass and various rushes and sedges. Invasive cattails and reed canary grass also dominate much of the wetland edges. The Pig's Eye unit also contains one of the largest heron rookeries in the state, and it is designated a Scientific and Natural Area, or SNA, by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Surveys of the Pig's Eye area will need to be completed prior to restoration work. Additional natural resource surveys will include plant, wildlife, and shoreline surveys and will focus on determining restoration needs. Natural resource projects and activities within the Pig's Eye unit will be implemented in accordance with the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area Regulations. Next slide, please. The total estimated cost for the island building project is $15.6 million. To offset the approximately $4.3 million in local share costs, Ramsey County applied for and was awarded a Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council grant, as mentioned. Additional habitat restoration efforts have an estimated cost of $380,000 with an ongoing maintenance cost of $90,000 every 3 years. The Corps is responsible for monitoring and determining ecological success for the ecosystem restoration projects it constructs for up to 10 years following project completion, including financial responsibility. No acquisition is proposed at this time. Therefore, there are no associated acquisition costs. Lastly, approval of the master plan does not commit the council to any funding at this time. Next slide, please. The Battle Creek Regional Park Pig's Eye Lake Master Plan is consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, particularly Planning Strategy 1 Master Plan requirements, as well as other council policies included in Thrive MSP 2040. Next slide, please. The proposed action before you, then, is that the Metropolitan Council approve Ramsey County's Battle Creek Regional Park Pig's Eye Lake Master Plan Amendment, require Ramsey County to continue to coordinate with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Metropolitan Council during the development and implementation of the Island Monitoring Plan, as represented by Ramsey County, acknowledge the Corps' responsibility for monitoring and determining ecological success for the restoration projects it constructs for up to 10 years following project completion, including financial responsibility, and require Ramsey County, prior to initiating any development of the regional park, to send preliminary plans to the Environmental Services Assistant Manager at the Metropolitan Council's Environmental Services Division. I should note that at the April 1st Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission meeting, following a robust discussion that is detailed in the first 3 pages of the staff report, 8 commissioners voted in favor of recommending the proposed actions, and 1 commissioner abstained. No commissioners voted to oppose the proposed actions. And with that, I will stand for any comments or questions you may have, and will remind you that Ramsey County and Corps of Engineers staff are on hand as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kelly, and thanks to our jurisdictional partners for being here and for their work on this. And so questions and discussions on that report? Any questions or discussion?
Looks like Chair Lilligren, Councilmember Lindstrom has a question.
Thank you. I can't see that. I apologize. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't actually think I have a question, just a quick statement. There's a few things as I read the report and the comments that we received from the public, a few things that gave me some concern. And I think as I looked into it a little bit further, most, if not all of those concerns have been addressed. The things that gave me concern when I learned about this project were, number one, the historical inequities of the east side of St. Paul. That this has been a dumping ground, which, by the way, for all of you may not know, this has been a dumping ground for the Met Council, Environmental Services. You may have seen that from 1977 till 1985, I believe. We've got our plant that's right there, and this was just a generation ago. This wasn't, our forefathers or anything. This was not that long ago. We were dumping sludge, ash, right into Pig's Eye Lake. So it was us that were making those decisions and contributed to the problem. So number one, the historical environmental inequities was a concern. Number two, the fact that there's this amazing rookery, blue heron rookery that's right there. Number three, just using dredge material makes me a little nervous too. And maybe I'm more on edge of that because of the headlines from Duluth. You may have seen they did a project which, just like this one, had good intentions to improve their beaches in Duluth, and ended up they used dredge material and later found metal shards all scattered all along the beach. So those were my concerns. I think those have been addressed in the following ways. One, Colin, you used the word robust in describing the community engagement, just with the feasibility study and with the master planning. And certainly COVID has had an impact on that, as it has with all sorts of engagement that we've seen in this body. The fact that the Corps has had a ton of experience building islands. I think that well over 100 islands have been built all across the Mississippi from St. Louis on up successfully. The fact that the Friends of the Mississippi River support the goals of this and have been engaged all along. That's not a group that rubber stamps just anything happening on the Mississippi River. I mean, if they had concerns with it, they would not be bashful about being loud about that. The fact that Ramsey County, because we the Met Council, a couple of years ago, asked for more public engagement and for the public officials to be on record, Ramsey County did that. They followed that, and they did what we asked them to do, and that the county board voted unanimously for this. And MPOS, same thing. They had a very vigorous conversation. I watched the video this afternoon, and folks on this call can attest that they were bombarded with a lot of fantastic, great questions, and voted unanimously with one abstention in favor of this project. So I feel like it's been well vetted. I think there's a lot of work to do on Pig's Eye Lake. I mean, my gosh, this addresses the habitat, some of the habitat concerns, but not the water quality concerns, not the overarching concerns around the ash sludge and the previous dumping that's happened over the years. So there's tons of work to be done. I certainly hope in the years coming that we can point to Pig's Eye Lake as a point of pride, as a place that we can take out our kayaks and our canoes and see the waterfall and do more fishing and all of those good things. So I think this is one step of many steps to improving that part of our region. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember, for that insight and that informed opinion. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to second what Councilmember Lindstrom just said. He said it far more eloquently and in detail than I could, but totally reflects my concerns. And I want to do a shout out to the staff and to MPOSC for all of the work that they've done on this. I was really impressed with the MPOSC meeting notes and found them really helpful. I want to say something about public engagement because that's my latest soapbox issue. Public engagement is hard anytime, but especially during COVID. And if we want to reach people throughout the community, we've got to come up, and when I say we, it's a royal we, it means everybody, not just Ramsey County, not just the organizations that are on board with this, not just us as a council or our cities and counties, but everybody. We've got to get more creative on how we reach out to people, because we have a lot of citizens who don't have access to computers and can't participate virtually. We are becoming increasingly bifurcated as it relates to where we get our news and our information. Newspapers are rapidly disappearing, especially here in the East Metro area. The local weekly and semi-weekly newspapers are pretty much gone, with very few exceptions. So we've got to come up with ways so that people can be engaged. And I always get a little concerned when I see things like pop-ups, because I wouldn't be able to participate in a pop-up in an informed sort of way. And for this kind of a conversation, you really do need to be informed. So I would just really encourage all of us with this project going forward, but also with any kind of planning and development, whatever we can do to really authentically engage with people and give our communities a chance to be a part of these decisions and a part of the planning. I think it would be really beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on this report or questions? Councilmember Chambliss, and then Councilmember Cummings. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I agree that the notes on this were very informative, and you can see that a lot of work and attention has gone into the site. And then I'm a proponent of good engagement as well. And I think being flexible with the engagement is so important, because what works in one geographic area may not work in another. And with a different demographic group. Pop-ups may not work for some groups, but for groups that don't have access to certain buildings or infrastructure, pop-ups may be the only way for you to get their attention, or they may not be able to have transportation, and pop-ups can kind of help meet people where they are. But we need to continue to have this type of engagement and conversation amongst each other so that we can improve how we do our work and the results of our work.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask Mr. Kelly if he or other staff respond specifically to each of the letters that we get. To me, that seems that is also part of public engagement, and that if someone takes the time to write to us or express to us their concerns, that they deserve a direct reply. So I'm just asking if that is part of our protocol.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kelly.
Councilmember.
Yeah, thank you.
Cummings, sorry for jumping in there. Absolutely, yeah. If the council is receiving comments directly addressed to us or to staff specifically, we will respond to those email messages if they're directed to others, to council members, to the chair of the council. Then we'll typically, as staff, we'll leave it to others within the organization to respond. But it is indeed my understanding that we will respond to each and every one of these messages that are being shared with council members and other folks.
Thank you. Councilmember Cummings?
I was just going to say, I just want to make sure that because I can see that there are quite a few public comments that have been received in general on this item, and some of us have gotten them. I imagine we've gotten the same ones, but I haven't double checked to see, but we could forward them. I just want to reiterate, I think it's just incredibly important to respond and to each one that any of us get individually or the committee gets as a whole in a timely fashion. And that is also an important part of our public outreach. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. And again, I'll just note that the comments that we have received as of noon today are posted on the agenda at the website, and we'll continue to post those additional comments as they come in. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson, and then Councilmember Vento. Councilmember Johnson.
You're mute, Judy.
Sorry, you'd think I'd know by now. Sorry about that. A lot of the questions I had have been asked and answered, but we still, I got, a couple of emails today, and, are we convinced that we've done our job reaching into community and that we feel confident right now that we've done the work we need to? And specifically, I'm sorry I didn't get to participate or catch up with MPOSC on this, so I'm just trying to do my part in understanding this critical area review and, just how the Corps isn't going to follow some process. And, as I read these, the concerns have not been mitigated. And, that's not always possible. But I just, the point of that Councilmember Cummings made was one that I have made a couple months ago, is making sure that council doesn't just haphazardly get one or two of these, but, ahead of time. And I know through MPOSC, maybe they were posted there and I missed it, but just kind of see the totality of what community is saying or not saying if we haven't, engaged them properly. So that's the biggest issue for me on this. And I really do appreciate Councilmember Lindstrom's pulling back, some history on this and our own role as Met Council. So that's where I'm at on this right now. Just more curious of, do we really believe we've reached into BIPOC community on this? Because a letter I got today is not saying we have. And I mean, we in the royal kind of way. And also, I agree with Councilmember Cummings. I get things and I respond when I can, but when they come in mass and it's not directed to me, I'm not responding on those, but I'm also not seeing responses on those. So that would be helpful that I know things are replied to. I will just say this is just very different than than my city government experience, because we would be copied on everything. We'd be CC'd, reply to all, and we'd be in the loop on everything. And for me, it's just harder at Met Council to stay in the loop on these things.
Thanks, Councilmember. And before I recognize Councilmember Vento, did you want a response from Mr. Kelly on your question about the satisfaction we have of the adequacy of the outreach into BIPOC communities?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I do. And I know that just everywhere we all are showing up at Met Council and our work, we're asking these questions when community engagement shows up. Right. So here we are today, and I push on this like all of you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to know who the abstention was and why, more out of curiosity, or what that might have been.
Well, thanks. Mr. Kelly.
I think I'm unmuted. So, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, you had a few questions and comments in there, which I appreciate very much. I'll start with the last question first, because it relates to the other question you posed. It was Commissioner Brown who abstained from the vote at MPOSC on the 1st of April. My understanding is that was her very first opportunity to vote as a MPOSC commissioner, and so chose to abstain from the voting in that particular vote. However, it was also Commissioner Brown who raised some similar questions to those that you just posed about engaging folks in St. Paul, and specifically in Ward 7 in St. Paul. And Ramsey County staff, Scott Yankee, responded to questions about public engagement and specific engagement in St. Paul, both for the feasibility study related to the island building project, and then for the master plan amendment for the Pig's Eye Lake unit, which we're discussing today. And those That question and those responses are detailed on page 2 of our staff report today. To just very briefly summarize the response to the second part of the question. And if I may paraphrase, Mr. Yankee said that the county tried to engage those communities as much as possible by using advocates in the community and by notifying district councils of the opportunity to review and provide comment on the plan amendment. That was really just me reading the staff report, not paraphrasing, but that was the response back on the 1st of April. Of course, we do have additional staff resources here available to say more if indeed council members would like to hear more.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. And I see that Mr. Mullen has gone on camera. Did you want to add something to that, Mr. Mullen?
Chair Lilligren, no, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I guess I would open that other staff that would like to comment further. Mr. Yankee's on the meeting. Any others? Speak now. All right. Seeing no further, I'll recognize Councilmember Vento, and I see you, Councilmember Cummings, as well. Councilmember Vento.
I'll pass.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up on what Councilmember Johnson said, because it also was my experience in city government, is we would be CC'd on everything. And so if there are in fact replies, if we, this committee, or whoever is included on a particular email could be included in that, because it also helps us to understand further the details and have confidence that those inquiries have been addressed and so forth. And so if you would do that, I would appreciate that, and I think that others would as well.
Mr. Chair, if I
Agree.
may.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, please. Is that Director Barajas? Yeah, please.
Yes, this is Lisa Barajas, Community Development Director, and certainly Councilmember Cummings and Johnson. In a typical public hearing process, we would compile all of the comments that we receive, put them in a document for you, provide a response to comments, and share that in a more consolidated format. We don't often receive public comments on issues in front of the council that aren't part of a public hearing. And we don't always know if you're receiving the same email that we're receiving. And I know sometimes it circles back. I would say we've been receiving emails on this for probably 5 or 6 years. So we don't always know what you're receiving, but we certainly can coordinate with your community specialists who support you as well. And we typically have a good conversation about it, especially when they see things popping up quite a bit across several accounts. But we will do a more coordinated job in that. I don't always know if you receive the same things that I receive and vice versa. So when we're not all CC'd on the same emails, but certainly there are some things that we can put into place to better coordinate and be sure that we are sharing those more broadly with you as council members.
Thank you, Lisa. Councilmember Cummings, is that it? And I see Councilmember Vento is requesting the floor. Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was negotiating with a barking dog and forgot what my question was, but I remember. I would appreciate going forward, and I don't know how frequent these would need to be, but I would appreciate going forward for us to get updates on this, given that it has been a contentious issue and it will be a challenging one. So I would appreciate getting updates. And I failed to do a shout out in my acknowledgements earlier to Councilmember Lee. This is his district, and he has done a great job of connecting with his communities on this and putting up with folks like me who have been a bit anxious about it. So I want to really commend Councilmember Lee. You're a great partner.
Thank you, Councilmember, and I'll second the support of Councilmember Lee's involvement. Did staff want to comment on Councilmember Vento's request for regular updates? Okay, hearing none. Did I see anyone else requesting the floor? Just further discussion on this report.
I would just, Mr. Chair, I would just offer that we're happy to do that, and we can probably provide that more readily through your daily report that you receive twice a week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lisa. Further discussion on this report? Further discussion. Otherwise, staff has proposed that we approve Ramsey County's Battle Creek Regional Park Pigs Eye Lake Master Plan and also recommended a series of directions relative to that approval. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Is there a second?
Wolf seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember. Discussion on that motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. That motion is unanimously adopted. And thanks again, Councilmember Lee, for your involvement. Thanks for all the council members for the discussion, and especially thanks for the community for being engaged in these conversations. And we will move on to our next business item, which is 2021-88. It's the from the city of Lake Elmo, the West Lake Elmo MUSA planning area. And Mrs. Esmaeili is here to present. Welcome, Mrs. Esmaeili. We don't hear you, Raya, if you're talking.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can, yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Oh my God. I had a very brief heart attack. Anyway, I
All's
apologize
well, all's
about that.
well.
Hi everyone. My name is Raya Esmaeili, and I'm a senior planner in local planning assistance and here to present to you the West Lake Elmo MUSA planning area amendment. Next slide, please. So as shown in figure 2 of the staff report, which you can see on the screen, Thrive MSB 2040 gives the city of Lake Elmo a community designation of emerging suburban edge and rural residential. The area affected by this amendment, which is outlined in red on this map, um, basically requires us to change the community designation. As you can see, this area is being proposed for the community designation to change to emerging suburban edge from rural residential, and I will talk about that a little further. Next slide, please. This is figure 1 of the staff report. This map shows regional systems in relation to the amendment site. And as you can see, the site is immediately south of the Lake Elmo Phelan Keller Regional Trail Search Corridor. It's a little misleading, I think, to say immediately south because it's a search corridor. So we're not quite sure about the actual alignment of that. Next slide, please. So the amendment proposes a change to the MUSA boundary and reguides about 77 acres from rural area development to business park. The amendment site, as you saw, is located at the southeast corner of Ideal Avenue and 34th Street North, and it's right on the border with the city of Oakdale. It is part of a bigger 180-acre property, and that was acquired by the city through the 3M settlement. The purpose of the amendment is to accommodate a potential office warehouse development. And the amendment site is currently, as I mentioned, designated as rural residential, but that community designation does not allow for the provision of sewer service. and therefore the request requires a change to the community designation from rural residential to emerging suburban edge. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is figure 3 of the staff report, and as shown here, the current land use guiding for the amendment site is, again, rural area development. Density of this land use designation is a maximum of 1 unit per 10 acres, and these areas tend to be outside of MUSA. Next slide, please. So this figure, which is figure 4 of your staff report, is a proposed land use guiding for the amendment site, which is Business Park. And again, the amendment, as you can also see on this map, proposes to extend MUSA to include this site. Next slide, please. The amendment itself changes the commercial industrial land supply because of the change in land use designation. But it also discusses forecast changes for 2 of the previous amendments from the city. The cities sometimes do that to collectively change or talk about changes to forecast as part of several amendments. So these changes are underlined in tables 1 and 2 of the staff report, which you can see on this screen as well, that reflects both the overall forecast for the city and the sewer service forecast. This forecast change consequently changes the city's affordable housing need calculation. Next slide, please. So as shown in figure 5 of the staff report, this is the land guided for affordable housing. The city's share of the region's 2021 to 2030 need for affordable housing was previously 971 units. As I mentioned just a little bit ago, the forecast change also impacts the affordable housing need number, and therefore the affordable housing need number is increased to 1,040 units. As a result, the city's 2040 plan is no longer consistent with council's housing policy plan, since the plan currently, as you see on the screen, guides about 150 acres of higher density residential land, which results in at least 1,025 units, which is lower than the changed need number. Communities that are inconsistent with the Housing Policy Plan will not be able to participate in the Livable Communities Act programs. Lake Elmo is not a current participant and didn't participate in the previous decade. And the city can address the difference through a few options that we have discussed with the city, such as guiding additional land to high density residential. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the staff find that the proposed amendment conforms to regional system plans. The amendment is inconsistent with the 2040 housing policy plan, but consistent with other council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the proposed action before you is that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. Authorize the City of Lake Elmo to place its comprehensive plan amendments into effect. Revise the city's forecast and sewer service forecast upward in 2030 and 2040 as shown in tables 1 and 2 in the review record. Revise the Thrive MSB 2040 community designation of the subject area from rural residential to emerging suburban edge for the area shown in figure 2 of the review record. Revise the city's affordable housing need allocation for 2021 to 2030 to 1,040 units. Next slide, please. It's a lengthy one. Find that the amendment renders the city's comprehensive plan inconsistent with the council's housing policy and that the city is therefore ineligible to participate in Livable Communities Act programs. Require the city to submit a copy of the wastewater intercommunity flow agreement between cities of Lake Elmo and Oakdale to the Metropolitan Council Environmental Services once it has been executed. and advise the city that to be consistent with the council housing policy, the city needs to increase the inventory of land guided to support the development of low and moderate income housing for the 2021 to 2030 decade by at least 15 units by guiding enough residential acres with sufficient minimum density, and to implement the advisory comments in the review record for parks, forecast, and land use. And next slide, please. With that, I am happy and to answer any questions that you may have about this one.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Esmaeili, for the presentation and for your work on this. Committee members, discussion, questions on that report? And if you want to just jump in, I can't see you all right now. I have my computer has an issue with WebEx. So
Mr. Chair, it's Johnson.
thank you, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question in our search corridor, and with this being changed to business district, which good for the city, attracting more business. But do we, how does it impact our future search corridor? Should development take place over the corridor, or do we work with the city in advance on, I mean, they obviously must know that we've got a search corridor. I'm just wondering, how do we negotiate once development comes in and we're not ready yet to be specific about where our search is going to land? And then how do we negotiate with the city on if we do want to purchase land, or would we ask that it not impede in the search corridor? I'm just not sure how that works.
Yes,
Yeah,
Chair Lilligren, Councilmember Johnson, I'm going to try to take a stab at the question, and then I will turn it to Director Barajas, who has her camera on. The nature of a search corridor is that the alignment is not determined yet, meaning that there is a wide range of location for that alignment to take place. I think it's about like a mile each way, something like that. Based on that flexibility and future plans of this area, then this would be Washington County. When Washington County goes into master planning for this specific trail, then at that point they will be working with all the communities, including the cities of Lake Elmo and Oakdale, which is right there, right next to it, in determining the exact alignment of the trail. So at that point, I think that would be the chance to discuss where the best location for it is and how that land acquisition potentially would work out.
Thank you. Director Barajas, do you have anything to add?
Now, what Raya did is such an excellent job. I would say that the only other thing that we offer early on is just to coordinate with Washington County as part of the development process in case there are opportunities to do site design a little bit differently in anticipation of future acquisition.
And
Well,
if I may
thank
add
you.
one quick thing and follow up to Director Barras's comment. In fact, the Parks Advisory comment in the staff report is specifically on that, to coordinate with Washington County on the trail master planning.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson, anything else?
No, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what I presume is we're way too early to even talk about rights of way or anything like that. But I know how hard it is if you don't get them in advance. So it's great to hear that we've really got a solid process to make sure we can continue with that process. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I just think it's great to see that that area is developing and has the potential for providing more job opportunities with the warehouse area, and hopefully that will provide more livable wages to people that may not have access in that area.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on this report? Any further discussion? Anyone? Speak up, because I may not be able to see you, please. So, hearing no further discussion, staff proposes that we authorize the City of Lake Elmo to place its comprehensive plan amendment into effect, and a series of directions related to that comprehensive plan amendment. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Both moves approval.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember. Discussion on that motion. Any discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That is adopted, and that concludes our business items for today. So we'll move on to our sole information item, which is an opportunity to discuss a local housing incentives account, or LHIA, affordable home ownership pilot. And I know Ms. Beard is here, but I also know Ms. Johnson is here to present. Ms. Beard, did you want to say anything to introduce the item? Otherwise, we'll just move on to Ms. Johnson.
No, let's start with Ash. Thank you.
Sounds good. Ms. Johnson, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. So Tara, Beard, and I will be tag teaming this presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So Tara is the manager of Livable Communities, and I work on the Livable Communities team and manage the Local Housing Incentives Account, or LHIA. And we're here to discuss with the committee an affordable homeownership pilot within LHIA. Next slide, please. So first, I'll give a brief overview of LHIA, and then Tara will follow up with a summary of evaluation work done for this program. And this was done as a part of a comprehensive effort to evaluate all LCA programs. After that, we'll explore the idea of an LHIA single-family homeownership pilot together. And lastly, seek input from the committee and answer any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. So first, a little background. The Livable Communities Act, or LCA, includes the Local Housing Incentives Account. And LHIA provides funds specifically to develop and preserve affordable housing. So that is multifamily, which is mostly rental, and single family, primarily ownership housing. And we, because this is so prominent, we use rental housing and multifamily, single family, and ownership interchangeably. So LHIA exists to help those communities who are enrolled in LCA achieve their affordable housing goals. And this program is pooled with, the funds from this program is pooled with other state and affordable housing funds in an annual RFP, which is called the Consolidated Request for Proposals, or RFP, issued by Minnesota Housing. So from statute, our baseline amount of funding is $1.5 million a year. But this year we awarded $5.5 million, and we are very excited to have $8 million for this upcoming round. And lastly, LHIA awards require a dollar-for-dollar match from the participating community for which the project is located. Next slide, please. So for reference, here's a walkthrough of the LHIA application process. So starting on the left, developers apply to Minnesota Housing for multifamily rental or single family ownership projects. And in this particular diagram, I have named the developer account Selena. And next, Minnesota Housing, and that includes single family and multifamily teams, they do an initial review of applications and decline those that aren't feasible. So this process happens simultaneously but separately. So the single family team is looking at the apps, multifamily team looking at the apps at the same time, but they don't work together. So they're reviewing the applications for proposals, organizational capacity, or the project financial feasibility. So next, Minnesota Housing sends Met Council staff feasible applications that requested LHIA. And we review those proposals for LHIA criteria and priorities. And we work with both teams, single family and multifamily, to determine how much funding goes into each housing type. Next, simultaneously, there are selection committee meetings. And this selection committee is made up of multiple funders, which includes the Met Council. And the committee further reviews the applications with light to our own individual organization priorities. And we talk about these priorities together with Minnesota Housing. So once the final list of proposals is shaped up after all this, the Minnesota Housing Board makes their final funding decisions at the end of the year, and the Met Council Board then approves our final funding approvals at the end of, or at the beginning of the year. And this is like an overview of the process. There's usually a lot of feedback loops and back and forth, but this is kind of like a simplification for all of us to generally understand what it's like. And now that I've discussed some of this background and how LHIA works in practice, I'll turn it over to Tara to talk about our efforts to evaluate this process that I just described. Next slide, please.
Thanks so much, Ash. Thanks, Greg. All right, so I know that it is no surprise to this committee that we've been deep in evaluation mode across LCA for a little over a year now, but up till now we've focused our conversations with you on LCDA and TOD programs primarily. So we're excited to share with you some of the work we've been doing around LHIA as well in terms of evaluating its impact and its purpose. Ash described how LHIA is embedded in the state's RFP process, and that partnership comes with a lot of benefits to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, to the council, and to applicants. But it does make for a more complex evaluation process. And because it includes fewer funding sources and fewer projects, we decided to start a deeper evaluation process focusing on the single family side of awards as we began that evaluation work in 2020. Like other LCA program evaluation, we focused on looking at the geographic scope of applications and awards to kind of better understand how accessible and effective our grant funds are for our wide variety of participating communities. We looked into council housing policies and priorities, specifically around single family housing and affordable homeownership opportunities, to really think about how well LHIA funds are furthering those goals. And now I'm going to share highlights of our research on those two key themes and how it led us to contemplate the creation of a single family RFP of our own. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the first slide of a couple slides I'm going to show. And before I get started, I have to mention that there is a just slight correction on this slide from the one you'll find in the informational item. So this is the correct slide. It's not a hugely substantive change, but just if you notice the bar looks a little different in the info item, that's I just wanted to acknowledge that. Apologies. The next few slides, we're going to look at how single family applications and awards to the RFP have trended over the past 5 years. As I outline in the information item as well, there are a number of awards over the past 5 years that were for scattered site projects. And if they cross over multiple counties, it's especially difficult for us to accurately integrate those applications into the data. So they are not included in these charts, but there is still some helpful context for the geographic distribution of our funds that we can see. So this chart, we're looking in blue where single family applications to Minnesota's RFP came from by county, pulling out the central cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. The orange bar shows where awards were made, and the gray bars are the awards in which LHIA funding was included. And it's perhaps unsurprising, but we do see a vast majority of applications and awards coming from the central cities. We also see a fair amount in suburban Hennepin County relative to other counties. But Hennepin County, including Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul, only represent about 1/3 of all participating LCA communities over the 2016 to 20 time period, even though they account for well over half of all applications and awards. It was also interesting for us to notice that there have been no single family applications at all from some of the counties in our region in the past 5 years. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge that that is not to say that those counties and other organizations, nonprofits, local governments are not doing anything to support affordable homeownership. I want to be clear, I'm simply trying to connect the dots between who is accessing the LHIA funds for single family projects and who is not. Next slide, please. Since the number of awards doesn't always equate, in fact, hardly ever equates to the exact number of units, we wanted to also make sure we were looking at the data in unit form. And basically long story short, the trend pretty much holds for unit counts as well, with a significant majority of affordable homeownership units funded through the RFP occurring in the central cities and suburban Hennepin in the 5-year time period. Next slide, please. We also wanted to better understand the role that population density plays, perhaps, in interest in the awards and the awards themselves. So we looked at the number of units funded through the RFP and correlated that to the number of households in each county or in the central cities. So this shows that suburban Hennepin County has more households than many of the other counties, which could account for higher shares of applications and awards. And it also shows Carver County has definitely taken advantage of the RFP commensurate to its households. But the central cities and other suburban counties still appear very disproportionate when you're looking at the total number of households in that community and the amount of single family units funded through the Super RFP. When you consider that many affordable homeownership projects take advantage of existing housing stock as well versus new construction, that could potentially be even kind of more of a disparity. Next slide, please. Finally, in this kind of data series, we wanted to consider award geography in the context of housing tenure. So where there is a majority of rental housing and where there's a majority of single family housing. We wondered if more affordable homeownership applications were being awarded in places with more single family units. And this was a really informative exercise, I think, for me at least. The two geographies on this chart with the most diverse housing tenure are also the ones getting the most funding and applying for the most affordable single family housing funding through this RFP. So in communities where single family housing is the predominant housing choice, there's very little state or regional funding creating affordable homeownership opportunities. So the conclusion of this sort of geographic distribution analysis was that as staff, we want to find ways to get our affordable homeownership dollars spread more widely across the region. Next slide, please. We've also been, since around 2018, doing a lot more on the housing policy team to understand affordable homeownership needs and models. And we certainly aren't the only ones. Undeniably and understandably, affordable rental needs have been prioritized, especially post-recession in terms of funding and advocacy. But the role of affordable homeownership opportunities on the spectrum of a broader, healthy housing market is incredibly important. The state's report on former Governor Dayton's task force on housing noted, and not for the first time, large racial disparities in homeownership. This committee, of course, as a part of the entire council, has stated in your strategic plan the objective of increasing homeownership for Indigenous households and households of color. And despite a continuation of historical discrimination practices in real estate and lending and the surge of predatory lending just prior to the Great Recessions, studies show that homeownership continues to be a source not just of housing stability, but wealth creation for African-American homeowners. So council staff wanted to be really thoughtful about considering how effectively we can use LHIA single family awards to focus on decreasing the homeownership gap across race. We reached two conclusions. We can't create more opportunities for affordable homeownership in parts of the region that aren't engaging in the RFP process with Minnesota Housing. Second, we cannot prioritize applications that intend to focus on homeownership for BIPOC households when we are not in charge of the application process or the award process. As we continue to analyze and consider data and policy, we found ourselves returning to this same question, which I'm going to turn over to Ash to share with you, as well as some of our outreach outcomes. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Tara. So to dig a little deeper, we asked ourselves and others, which we discuss on the next slide, if we bought council LHIA money in-house, could we, one, attract and fund homeownership opportunities in more parts of the region, and two, more directly influence how awards could help decrease racial disparities in homeownership? Next slide, please. So we realized we needed to speak to our partners before bringing it to CDC or council for further exploration. And you can see those stakeholders listed here. So this list includes groups that are involved in creating various kinds of homeownership opportunities across the region, and that includes manufactured housing and co-ops. It was important for us to reach out to those communities as well that have majority single-family housing that have not applied to LHIA, much of what Tara talked about in previous slides. We wanted to get the input from people who may not be as involved in LCA or LHIA. So, and furthermore, it was important to get input from those that are knowledgeable about bridging the affordability homeownership gap for families in our region. So we also talked to internal council groups and partners like Metro Cities and Minnesota Housing, our main partner in this process. So next slide, please. And here's a summary of what we heard. So in the top left box, you can see that we heard a lot about the consolidated RFP process has improved over the years, but it's still challenging to navigate. And especially for smaller projects and some requests from smaller cities with less staff, it could be a barrier to navigate that process and apply. So we understand that there's multiple sources of funding in the Minnesota consolidated RFP process. It's complex, and that these projects can take a lot of effort to review for feasibility and more. So in the top right box, we heard that if we were to, we heard that affordable housing developers have an interest and a capacity to work in the broader region, but they may need some help with matchmaking with interested cities. So if we were to undertake this effort, part of our role could be to act as a connector between organizations and developers who build new housing and preserve or do rehab work with the cities that would be interested in using LHIA funds for those purposes. On the bottom left, we heard that communities without significant transit options may be especially interested in a grant, affordable homeownership grant, outside of this larger consolidated RFP process. And here, we'd like to share that we specifically heard, as an example, from Carver County CDA staff. They shared that they don't have a lot of transit and density options to make them competitive in this larger process, and they would be interested in applying to an in-house program that has less barriers for them to navigate because of this this balance between transit and density and competitiveness. So then on the bottom right, we had a lot of discussions about our local match requirement as a potential barrier to applications in any format. So within the RFP or having an in-house program that is a legislative, that's in statute. So we can't necessarily easily change this without a legislative change, but we're thinking of creative ways that communities can meet match requirements, which includes property tax reductions for affordable homeownership units, for example. So next slide, please. So we're open to all feedback, and we've listed a number of questions here for our discussion. First, to gauge general support of this from the CDC, but also to hear initial ideas about what outcomes or goals could be. Any feedback on what we may have overlooked, and more folks that we should consider talking to or partnering with. And at this time, Carrie Lilligren, we're cool with kicking off those questions or kicking off answers to those questions.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Beard, for your work on this and for presenting it in such a understandable way. And I guess I'll turn to the committee in a second for questions and discussion. But I had one. This maybe relates to the outreach part, or maybe not. But the communities that we would be sort of looking toward to participate, maybe some of those communities that are under participating today, do they express an interest in a pilot like this? And I'll look to Ms. Beard or Ms. Johnson to respond, please.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. So we definitely heard general interest from a number of communities that haven't participated so far. We held one focus group with a number of communities specifically targeting and sending emails to those that haven't participated, and many showed up and shared some of the reasons why they haven't been able to participate or apply for LHIA funding, being very candid about the challenges that their communities face. And generally, they said that they would be interested in something that was smaller, easier, less pages, takes up less staff time, and maybe, it may only be one or two homes, say, for example, in a particular township or city that they don't necessarily want to go through this larger process for, but they would be willing to go through a smaller process to maybe get those few homes developed. And Tara, feel free to jump in as well.
Anything to add, Tara? Or?
Nope, I would just say, Ash, yep, we reached out to those particular communities and, again, with caution, it wasn't like, they're banging down the door. We
Right.
think we need to be really thoughtful about how we design this program. And if it's a pilot, what's the right size for the first year? And how do we kind of prepare ourselves for success and see if it takes off and builds into something bigger. But I certainly think we can say confidently that we got enough positive feedback to feel like it was worth continuing to explore.
Thank you. And I see that council members Lee and Chambliss and Johnson are all requesting the floor. But just one other quick question before I recognize them. And then, as it relates to the match requirements, and I know you've looked at statutory statutory guidelines, but I'm just wondering how much finesse or how deeply we've looked at the match requirements and how much we understand about the ability to sort of finesse those requirements with an existing statute and how much would take some kind of statutory change.
Mr. Chair, that's a great question. We've definitely spent our time kind of reading just the one sentence that basically you have to use to figure out a lot of different rules. And we spent a lot of time this year kind of refining and clarifying what counts as local match in a way that we feel is, does justice to the intent of the statute, but also provides as much flexibility as possible. And so, for example, one of the things we'll do is we do consider local match a source that comes from the county, even if the applicant is the city. Or we could also count a local match from the city, even if the applicant is the county. So there's some flexibility there. And really our take on the statutory language is that it doesn't specify where the money can come from. It seems to be specifying that it's the local government's intention that that money go there. And so, for example, a thing like tax credits has not counted in the past, and we still don't count that because that isn't so much there's nothing that prevents a developer from applying for tax credits through the super RFP and receiving that award outside of any sort of city approval process necessarily. And so that's not considered a city kind of effort. But outside of a few parameters like that, we accept all sorts of local match considerations like CDBG funding. Again, the counties have a lot of sources, any affordable housing trust fund. If the city has issued local housing bonds, which often is simply a kind of conduit funding and not necessarily a cost to the city directly, we count any tax increment financing, any taxes not incurred because of tax lost for financing. So we really have kind of poured through the sources and eliminated only the ones that we think are kind of questionable given the statutory language.
Sure. Well, thanks. And I have in queue council members Lee, Chambliss, Johnson, and Wolf. So Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for this great and informative presentation. I'd be supportive of a pilot. My other comment is that if folks out there across the region, we just want to make sure that they fall along transit nodes so that we're not putting folks out in the middle of nowhere where they can't get to work or recreation or or home. And then, so then my question is, during the selection committee process, for the folks who don't qualify or don't make it in the program for whatever reason, what happens to them? Do we recommend they go to other partners or seek other resources, or do they just fall through the kind of through the holes? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Mr.
Ms. Beard, a
Chair.
response? Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lee, another great question. And it's definitely one I've been trying to cipher out a little bit better in my first year, sort of figuring out what is our role in evaluating applications that go through a partner's process, kind of usually before we can evaluate them. What I can share is that many projects, especially on the multifamily side, often come through for funding and aren't funded the first year, but are funded a year or two after that, which is incredibly costly to the development process, and adds a lot of cost to an already more expensive than building market rate housing process. That also happens in the single family realm, and I will be honest, we've been exploring a little bit in the last couple years, a little bit of funding options, of funding with LHIA dollars through the Super RP for projects that were not funded by Minnesota Housing for their partner funding. And that wasn't done without strong consideration and conversation with both Minnesota Housing and the applicant city. But for example, Shoreview had applied for single family housing in 2019, a seven unit townhome project with Rondo Community Land Trust. And it would be one of the first, if not the first, suburban Ramsey project for the Rondo Community Land Trust. So a really exciting kind of expansion opportunity of an affordable homeownership model. And it didn't seem ready to Minnesota Housing. And we had a conversation with Shoreview that said, look, we aren't interested in funding you if you don't need it because you're not getting fully funded. But we believe so strongly this aligns so much with kind of our council priorities. If you feel like it would keep you alive for a year to come back for funding, and you can kind of share more about that with us, we would consider that. And I mean, when I say we, I sort of mean this body who did approve that funding to Shoreview for that. And sure enough, that was in 2019. In 2020, sure enough, Shoreview came through the Super RFP process again, and Minnesota Housing funded them through their single family resource, the Challenge Fund or Impact Fund within the Challenge Fund. So, it's not always easy to know when to make that decision and when not to. And we definitely, as a rule, tend to defer to projects that Minnesota Housing is also funding. But there can be some room for kind of conversation around certain projects that really meet some specific council need. If that didn't answer your question, please let me know.
No, you did.
Councilmember Lee? Yeah, thanks, Councilmember. And I think, is it Greg doing our technical support? I can't lower people's hands, so if you're able to do that, please. So I have in queue Councilmember Chambliss, Johnson, and Wolf. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of the detail that was put into this presentation for our detailed notes, as well as the PowerPoint. That's really helpful in kind of getting the wide breadth of the analysis that's been done. And I can't help but think about the affordability trend that's been happening, where it seems to me like the gap in cost of rent as compared to housing is closing, and they're getting more and more. The rent is getting so high that it's almost as cheap to buy as it is to rent. So what does that mean in terms of affordable housing? We need to keep an eye on that and maybe broaden our lens in terms of how we look at affordability and how we address affordability, because we need affordability in rent, we need affordability in housing, and we need it in an expanded geographic. So I'm really glad that we're looking at increased geographic diversity. Of course, we know what it looks like when it's not done right, when we don't have access to resources or transportation or community services or cultural and the like. So it's great to be a part of an organization that looks at those kind of things. One of the questions that was asked was, and I'm in support of this, by the way, a pilot is always a good way to learn about opportunities, increased opportunities, and looking back at what we've done in the past, as well as opportunities going forward. So one of the questions was, what else would you like to know? What have we considered or thought about? When you're looking at housing in terms of increasing wealth and home ownership, you know, sometimes it's not just as simple as affordability. We need to look at the process of getting to home ownership. That's really important because there are a lot of people out there, you know, that are making $40,000 a year or more and are still not able to get access to housing because of financial management issues, credit issues. So it's really important for us to look at how we can collaborate with other organizations or how we can work on, you know, financial literacy. I think that will help us also bridge those gaps because there are people that are kind of caught in the middle as well. And then for getting people through the pipeline, looking at community development partnerships, development partnerships where we have a diverse pool of developers, you know, people who are African American or African or Asian developers or development corporations that can bid on some of the projects in their own neighborhoods, and because it's a free market system, okay? And so a lot of times when we have projects or, you know, like transit-oriented development, it's kind of like, well, once that land or space is available, it's an open market. Whoever wants to develop or purchase buildings can purchase it as long as they meet the statute or requirements, right? So we need to diversify who our development participants are. So maybe looking at how we can do that as well, just kind of thinking out the box and being innovative so that, you know, if we keep doing the same things, we're going to get the same results. So innovation is key.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this work. And I think it's going to be interesting throughout this pilot on a couple of fronts. So the scorecard that I released, which actually is marking progress on the Governor's Task Force on Housing that was released in 2018. This year, for 2019, our most current data, you know, across the state, white population has a 77% home ownership rate. Black population has a 25% home ownership rate. And I can promise you that gap is not closing during the years of COVID in a really hot market. So it's a 52% gap. For the Asian community, they have 60% home ownership. Latinx and Hispanic is 49, and Indigenous is 49. BIPOC overall is 44. So there's a lot of work to do in this area. You know, it is a white hot real estate market. Building affordable housing is extremely hard from scratch because of all the costs that go involved. That's why preservation is so important. So in some ways, I'm not sure if we could consider, you know, the purchase of housing that's already on the market, that in some ways we could get more bang for the buck out of that rather than trying to, you know, find raw land out there, or redevelopment's even more expensive. So, you know, usually the most cost-effective way is to try to preserve our affordable housing. So many organizations that are working towards that will keep an eye on, you know, those homes that were built, you know, decades ago that are still somewhat affordable, might need some fixing up, and then, you know, get it in the hands of a new family or of folks who can then purchase it through some program. So I'd really encourage us trying to think about that, because you know, that's the struggle right now, and homes are I think with in the metro area we're well over 340 or 350 for that I think median price or average price home on the market. So we're well above affordable even in stuff that needs fixing up. So I know that in Plymouth our HRI looks at that, and I know many organizations are active in that. The other thing I would say is because our focus is on closing the disparities gap, and maybe we already talked to the Minnesota Homeownership Center because they are all over the state and are working with partnerships, realtors, you know, counties, everybody out there, and they are helping families get in the pipeline and get to, you know, from application to a yes at closing. And they work diligently with them. And I know that they want to work more broadly with organizations like ours. I'd also say there are nonprofits, funds out there that have money that are actively working to close gaps. So JP Morgan Chase and Family Housing Fund last year got a big grant from JP Morgan Chase specifically to close homeownership gaps for Black and I believe BIPOC community. So, you know, that again is trying to get the financing in the hands of the family and, you know, then trying to find the unit. So it doesn't have to be a brand new unit. It's just got to be a unit somewhere. And for the local match, I think TIF is a great opportunity because you're not losing anything. It's based on what exists today, and then you know anything new gets TIFed and back into the project, and then eventually comes back on the tax rolls. You're also able to capture the city tax, the county tax, and the school district tax, usually which they have no objection to do. So tax abatement at the city level is a really high hill to climb because what you're really doing is just getting a portion of the property tax, not the entire property tax, and then it just spreads a burden onto the neighbors who also might be struggling with affordable home ownership. And I don't know for the local match if we would consider a nonprofit contributor. So if a city or developer were to come in together, make application to one of the nonprofits or funds, whether it be POLAD or Family Housing or, you know, you name it, they're all, a lot of them are out there. But to come in partnership too, where that could potentially be the local match. I'm just always at Met Council trying to marry up that nonprofit community with the public sector community and infusing dollars that are out there that they're trying to place in well thought out programs. So those would be some of my thoughts and insights around this. And again, and then I guess last but not least, and I really agree with these statements that have been made by council members just ahead of me to try to cite these around transit and cultural opportunities. I will tell you though, my communities, not my larger communities, but my smaller communities have a real hard time with transit and some of those other opportunities, but yet, you know, they want to be able to provide home ownership. So, you know, when it comes to race and where people live and want to live and all of that and the things that we require, sometimes having those requirements, which makes sense for the people who live there, but those are the things that knock out those smaller communities. And those are the things that might be hampering people from participating in Livable Communities Act to begin with, because I think a lot of them are not resourced to get in the game, and then they don't have the assets needed to compete, which is why I think we're trying to do this program. So it's a pilot, so let's try to, you know, think more broadly on how we can bring resources to bear in maybe other ways that we haven't before.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Vento. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned before that you talked with places that haven't participated much. What did Dakota County CDA say about it? Were they interested in the pilot or doing something along that line, or is it still not something they want to pursue?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, I should double check my notes to be 100% sure. I know that Dakota County CDA was invited to our focus group that included all of our county partners. And if I recall correctly, I believe Chris Elfson accepted but did not end up attending. So I was not able to get direct feedback from them, but we did attempt to reach out, and I'm sure there will be more opportunities to connect as we move forward.
If we could try again, because I mean, if we have a program that one of our fastest growing counties doesn't bother to participate in, that's problematic, and we need to fix if there's something we can do to make it more attractive. The other question that I had was around manufactured homes. That was on your list of things, but that's one area where preservation in terms of not fixing up a really old dilapidated trailer, but helping somebody have that one hauled away and get one that's more energy efficient and whatnot would seem to be a great avenue for this money, but it doesn't seem like it ever happens. So what can we do to make that more plausible?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, we are right there with you. And we actually just met for a check-in with Minnesota housing staff because they had a state allocation of funds specifically for manufactured housing community improvements. And they had their pilot offering last fall. And we met with them then, and then we met with them just recently, Ash and I, to learn more about how that went and to see if there's any kind of smart overlapping of what our funds can and can't do, and how they're different. And I think that, again, with manufactured housing communities and the requirement that the applicant be the city, we are really thinking about kind of fine tuning our outreach and basically kind of starting with the conversation around, is the city supportive of preserving the manufactured housing communities, if any, that they have in their community? And if so, is this a tool that they would be interested in applying for to do that? And thinking through kind of what are given the parameters of the program and the statutory requirements and our own kind of policies and practices, what could it be used for, and how can we do that in a smart way with Minnesota Housing's offering? So we talked about kind of, would it make sense for our funding to come before it or after it, or different, we talked about a great point was Minnesota Housing staff mentioned that their feedback was only having one opportunity a year to apply for funds was really problematic. So we thought, well, what if we purposely kind of have our offering at a different time of year? And we're really having similar conversations with the single family staff at Minnesota Housing as well, because our intent is really to layer programs that can do different things in a smart way, not certainly to get applications that could be well served in an existing program. So I hope that sort of answered your question, or at least reassured you. We are thinking a lot about how doing this could reach manufactured housing communities and how to really find the cities that want to support them, and then get their input on kind of the best way to structure the application and award process.
Thank you. I would be interested in hearing more about that, because the communities around me have quite a few manufactured home parks, and they're thriving. But there's, the people with the 1950s trailer that goes up in 15 seconds if it starts on fire that really, need some help.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to speak quickly. There's a lot of activity in the backyard, and my dog is out on the deck and looking at me with his little nose pressed up against the glass. Anyway, I really like the idea of this being a pilot project. I think it gives us a chance to learn, and I'm assuming this will be something that the housing work group will be engaged with. But I hope that we as a community development committee can kind of stay abreast as things progress and can offer thoughts. I'd be interested in knowing how we can, as council members, including our colleagues who aren't on this committee, can help engage some of our counties and communities and townships in this, because I think it has a great deal of potential and I'm excited. Thank you. It's a great presentation to both of you.
Thank you, Councilmember Vento. I hope everything's okay in your backyard. In different parts of the metro, a lot of activity in the backyard means different things.
Yeah, well, these are ducks. These are ducks. So.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Cummings. We can't hear you, Molly.
That's too bad. It was really profound, my first, and now I can't remember what they were. No, thank you. It was a great presentation. So thank you very much, Ashleigh and Tara and staff. I think this is a great program that deserves a chance, and a great discussion by council members. I think some really great thoughts on that. I'm curious, a pilot is just that, it's a pilot, and oftentimes the first at bat is not a triple play or a grand slam, and we learn, and that's the whole point. So I'm wondering what you think is an adequate amount of time for a program like this to judge its success or lack of, because that 1 year is pretty tough. So curious as to what you think about timing.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cummings,
Chair.
boy, I wish I could throw this one to Ash, but I'll take it. You know, we are absolutely thinking about that. And, you know, honestly, it might be a good time while we still want to continue getting feedback. There have been a couple comments that kind of relate to our next slide. So I wonder, Greg, if you could put the presentation back up and go to our next slide and just make sure you all know we still want your feedback and questions. You know, our kind of step today was to really see if this was, you know, worth additional time, kind of starting to actually build the skeleton of a program, starting to ask exactly those questions. How do we define, you know, how do we evaluate success? How do we define success? What are our goals? And as I mentioned earlier, kind of like a right sizing of the pilot year with kind of some infrastructure in place to let it grow if it wants to and can succeed. You know, our goal was to return to you if we got the green light, kind of, so to speak, to get more specific, because we've been thinking about this and talking about this broadly for well over a year, but we haven't started to write down the program, you know? So our plan was to come back in August with some of those more specific details. We've started mapping out the program. This is what we're thinking about. This is how we would measure success. This would be our goals. These are some funding options. These are, you know, some of the tensions that have come up as we've started to talk to partners about things. So without wanting to not answer your question, I don't know yet. I think that's one of the things we'd like to spend the summer asking our partners to contemplate with us, and then come back with something, with an educated kind of, you know, set of options for evaluation and measuring success in probably August.
Thank you. Councilmember Cummings, does that answer your questions? Great.
It does, thank
Further
you.
discussion? Yeah, thank you. Further discussions on this report? And again, I can't see you all right now, so please jump in, council members, committee members, if you have a question. And, you know, I would just kind of weigh in saying, you know, your first question is about, is there committee support? I think generally, yes, you were hearing that. To the question about who should we talk to or partner with, you know, I think it was brought up by Councilmember Johnson and maybe others, Councilmember Chambas, that there are lots of communities that are really trying to focus on this increase of home ownership. So there are community development corporations, CDFIs, and others. I mean, speaking just from my participation in the Native community, this is a priority. And so there's a lot of infrastructure being put in place to support that. Generally, I would say what people have learned, or what we've learned over the last decade or so, is that you need to get upstream in sort of the financial literacy, as Councilmember Chambliss called it. And it's not that if we're really serious about increasing BIPOC home ownership, it may mean other kinds of involvement. Not that we as the Met Council can do all of that, but as we talk about partnerships, there are organizations that are doing it. I guess the last thing I would say, I think the outcomes and goals, I think the 2 points, increasing the diversity or the geographic diversity, and also decreasing racial homeownership disparities, are exactly right on. And then, and also making sure that we're talking about home ownership as part of a wealth building strategy and part of a generational wealth building strategy. I just think that's important for us to keep in our perspective. But I think, and lastly, I guess I'll say I like the idea of us launching this pilot as the Met Council. And I feel like sometimes, you know, we don't have a ton of resources in this area. We tend to co-locate them with Minnesota Housing, and I feel like our impact can be diminished that way. And so I feel like us sort of thinking out, okay, here's our priority, here's our pilot, we're helping to maybe steer the system more in the way we want to see the region to be engaged. And I think that's a good idea. I think that's good for us to do. That's my 2 cents. Any other discussion on this report? Discussion. Ms. Beard, Ms. Johnson, do you feel like you're getting it? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Yeah, sorry. sorry if you already addressed this, but our friends over at Minnesota Housing, when you broached this with them, were they like, yeah, go for it and let us know how it goes, or what was their response?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, fair question. I will admit the initial response was, we would really like to know how we can improve our process to help you achieve any goals that we're not meeting, that you have, and I very much appreciate that. And part of the reason for a pilot is because we would certainly still have an LHIA allocation into the super RFP for 2022. And there's no reason we couldn't continue to use some of that allocation towards single family awards. So we may consider them differently, given we would have our own pilot to consider, but we aren't sort of pulling ourselves out of the super RFP by any stretch, and even out of the single family super RFP, at least that's not the initial, automatic outcome. So I would say that, I don't know that they were excited and like, great, but I also think they recognize that we're a fairly small portion of their overall funding. The funders pool and the collaborative that puts money into this super RFP has diminished over the years, kind of little by little. And the only folks remaining are basically us and the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, which funds non-metro projects. So, there are pros and cons to all of it. I don't think it's a celebration, but I think it's an understanding and a respectful kind of appreciation that we would like to explore some things that are a little bit more difficult to do through an agency that operates kind of in a statewide presence. Talked a lot about how much our work in comp plans over the last couple of years has given us such a nuanced understanding of housing needs across the region. And the state is doing an insane amount of grant funding in such a short period of time with so many different sources. And they just don't have, in some ways, they have so much more capacity than us, right? To like underwrite projects and really understand their financial feasibility. And in this way, we happen to have a lot more capacity to sort of think about the regional outcomes of our funding awards and make those awards and reach out for applications from communities that will get us toward those awards. So they are great partners. This is, not at all to try to separate ourselves from them, but just kind of a first step in a certain niche area of seeing if we can maybe be more proactive about certain outcomes and goals we have as the council. I hope that answered your question. So.
It sure did, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure if our pilot doesn't quite go the way that we were hoping, they'd welcome us back like the prodigal son.
I think we're supporting their efforts, right, to figure out how, to sort of crack this nut that we're all trying to work at. And so I think this is super appropriate. I look forward. So it sounds like I think, Terry, you said you're looking for the green light. It sounds like you got it. And we look forward to you coming back in August, was it? Where am I here? Yeah.
That's, Mr. Chair, that's our general goal, sometime in late summer, to come with a more specific design in mind and highlight some of the tensions that have come up and some of the questions we still have, and just continue the conversation.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Council member, committee members, any other questions, discussion? Otherwise, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Beard, thanks so much. This is really a good conversation. I appreciate how it was kind of teed up for us so we could answer the questions you really needed us to be talking about. So thanks. Anything else, committee member? No, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to, I'm hopeful that council will move forward on this, and I would like to, dig deeper in the housing work group and discussing this as well.
Sounds good. Committee members, anything else? Director Barajas, anything for us?
Nothing else for you today. Thank you.
Thanks. Michelle, anything?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Chair Lilligren.
All right. Seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you,
everyone.
Have a good week.
Bye.